Today's presentation will talk about hydrocarbon refrigerants, in particular R290 and its introduction in the True's commercial product line. We at True would like to welcome and thank you for your participation in this presentation. The agenda for this presentation is as follows. We will review the history of R290, then talk about its advantages, then review the significant new alternative policy, talk about safety as it relates to that policy, then talk specifically about service procedures as it relates to True's equipment, and then we'll review. Before we get started, let me ask you a question. Which of these four items do you think has the most propane in it? If you chose the can of Glade Superfresh air spray, you're correct. This can has twice as much propane in it as a GDM10. Are you surprised? The history of R290. Hydrocarbon-based refrigeration is not new. In fact, in Europe, South America, and Asia, they've been using R290 for more than 20 years, with about 70 million units in the field. True has been producing as well as shipping cabinets to Europe for the past 3 years. On February 21st of 2012, the EPA approved the use of hydrocarbon refrigerants in the United States. In particular, two types. R290 propane for the use in commercial refrigeration, and R600A isobutane for its use in residential refrigeration. The hydrocarbon advantages. In comparison to R134A and R404A, R290 has a very low global warming potential. Hydrocarbons are a natural occurring refrigerant, which means that they are naturally produced. Hydrocarbons contain zero ozone depletion potential, which is very important in today's green agenda. What is the Significant New Alternative Policy, or SNAP as we refer to it? The SNAP policy has a very strict set of guidelines that must be followed. The policy is written for new equipment only and may not be used to retrofit any existing equipment. In the policy, there are charge limitations in the amount of refrigerant that can be used. For R290, that limitation is 5.3 ounces or 150 grams. The SNAP policy requires special marking and labeling and states that all commercial equipment produced in the U.S. must meet UL 471 standard. That includes section SB, which is specific to the use of flammable refrigerants. There are also a set of standards just like this in place for the equipment going outside of the U.S., as you can see. Now, let's look at the special marking required, starting with the process tubes. All of the refrigerant line process tubes must be marked in PMS number 185 red. These additional labels are located on the cabinet. There are two on the back side of the cabinet, one on the evaporator cover, and of course the main serial tag inside the cabinet. We will now look at the labeling on the compressor. Should you receive a compressor and/or a condenser unit that does not look like the original one that was in the cabinet, please do not install it and call True immediately. Currently, the EPA requires that all hydrocarbon type refrigerants be recovered. This is currently under review, so stay tuned. Additionally, True is recommending that anyone who is going to service a piece of equipment containing a hydrocarbon refrigerant participate in some additional specialized training. R290 service safety as outlined by the EPA, RSES, UL, and True. When it comes to diagnosing any refrigeration system, there can be no shortcuts. Failure to comply could result in a serious injury. When working in the refrigeration system, it is recommended that good refrigeration practices be followed. It is important to keep in mind that this type of refrigerant has the potential to be flammable and/or explosive, so keep this in mind when you're working on this cabinet. We at True are mandating that anyone who is going to work on any of our equipment that contains a hydrocarbon type refrigerant participate in RSES's web-based training program as well as True's web-based training program. Hopefully, if you're reviewing this, you've already taken RSES's course. If not, please be sure to contact True to find out what steps are needed to make this happen. This chart shows the boiling point of R290. Notice that it falls between R134A and R404A. Also on this chart is the safety classification for each refrigerant. You can see that R290 is classified as an A3 refrigerant. This chart shows you how the refrigerants get their safety classifications. Some of the electrical components used in these cabinets will require special approvals based on the location of these components inside the cabinet. It is important that only OEM parts are used in any of the cabinets containing a hydrocarbon-based refrigerant. Here you can see the wire connectors that we are currently using. The wires just push into the wire connectors as shown in the picture on the left. The wire connector on the right is a spring-loaded positive pressure connector that you will need to use a tool to release the wire on. In the cabinet, we'll be using both types of wire connectors, depending on the location that they're used in. This is the compressor relay. Notice how the relay on the right is more enclosed. Next, we're looking at the temperature control. The major difference between the two is the contact points. Notice the control on the right. The contact points are enclosed. This is a picture of the condenser fan motor. Notice how the entire body of the motor is enclosed. The motor has a sealed shaft and uses a ball bearing instead of a sleeve bearing to reduce friction. You should have noticed a common theme when looking at all these components. Enclosing the components reduces the presence of an ignition source. When working on any cabinet containing R290, you should always use a combustible gas meter. We will be stocking these meters should you have the need to purchase one. Currently, the cost is about $200. Some other general precautions you should be aware of. Gases and liquid, when released under atmospheric conditions, can cause freezer burn if the refrigerant comes in contact with any bare skin. Also, like all other refrigerants released in a confined area, the refrigerant will displace the air. This is another reason why it is so important to work in a well-ventilated area. Always be aware of your surroundings and take the necessary precautions to ensure your safety as well as that of those around you. The best way to ensure this could possibly mean moving the cabinet to another area to work on. TRU's recommended service procedures. These are procedures that need to be followed when working on any TRU manufactured equipment. When working on a cabinet containing R290, it is important that all repairs be done in a well-ventilated area. When working with R290, you will need some specialized tools. One such tool is a venting hose. The venting hose should be used in conjunction with your vacuum pump. Try not to place the hose inside the building when at all possible. Additionally, you do not want to place the hose in an area where people may be gathered. It is recommended to place the hose outside of the building, at least 10 feet away from the building and 3 feet up from the base of the building. It is also recommended that you place a sign or placard near the vent hose. You will need a tank of oxygen-free dry nitrogen with the proper relief regulating valve on it. You will of course need some R290 and a special process valve for your tank of R290. A note about the propane. Should you be acquiring propane on your own, be sure that it's refrigerant grade propane. Refrigerant grade propane does not contain any additives in it and has a lower moisture content. We will also have propane available for you should you not be able to obtain it locally. Next, you will need some type of pinch-off tools. These are pictures of two different types of pinch-off tools. These tools will be your primary means to seal the refrigeration system. This is a picture of the warning sign that we will be providing you. It is recommended that you post this warning sign in the area that you're working. This is a picture of the lock ring tool that is used to install the lock ring. This tool is an option for the service provider. After the refrigeration system has been evacuated and charged, we then use the lock ring to seal the system process tube end. When working with any type of refrigerant, we strongly recommend that you follow good refrigeration practices. Most of these practices are not new and things we currently should be applying when working on any refrigeration system. Always be sure that it is necessary to tap into a sealed refrigeration system. Use your thermometer to assess how the cabinet is operating prior to tapping into the system. If it is determined that you need to tap into the refrigeration system, this is where and how you should install your temporary line taps. You will need to gain access to the condensing unit. Next, locate the high and low side process tubes. Once you've done this, trim back some of the red plastic tube coverings on these lines, as shown in these pictures. Be sure to leave yourself plenty of room at the end of the process lines. When installing your gauges, be sure to use as short a hose as possible. It is also recommended that your hoses incorporate some type of shut-off valve or are self-sealing. After you install your gauges, be sure to purge any air from them. When evacuating the refrigeration system, we require the use of a micron gauge. The system should be evacuated to a minimum of 500 microns. Have a CO2 or dry powder type fire extinguisher handy, should the need for one arise. Again, as a service person, it is always good to be familiar with the equipment and its operation. And when at all possible, we strongly encourage you to disconnect the power to the cabinet prior to working on it. Always turn on and leave on your combustible gas meter when entering the area where the cabinet is or while working on the cabinet in that given area. This may seem extreme, but it's extremely important to maintain good ventilation in the service area. Be sure to eliminate any and all ignition sources, especially if moving the cabinet is not an option. You should also keep in mind that you may be creating temporary flammable zones with the connections on your gauges or vacuum pump. Should you need to remove any component in the refrigeration system, it is recommended that you cut these parts out. The reason for this should be obvious. If the refrigeration system still has refrigerant present, you're supplying an ignition source to it. Going to speak some about evacuation. When you get to this point, you need to consider where you're going to place the vent hose. Ideally, we want to see the hose placed outside the building. Once you've identified where the leak is, you want to repair the leak. You should flush some oxygen-free dry nitrogen through the system prior and during this process. When pressurizing the system to leak check, pressurize no more than 180-200 pounds. You then want to leak check using bubbles or your gas meter. When brazing, we strongly recommend that you purge nitrogen through the system. It is now time to charge the system. Be sure to weigh in the charge and leak check again. Prior to removing your high side gauge, be sure to bleed its contents back through the manifold and into the low side. This picture shows where the pinch-up tools should be placed to seal the system prior to removing your gauges. The process tube can now be sealed by either brazing or using the optional lock ring tool. When working on any of the electrical components within the cabinet, it's a good idea to disconnect the power to the unit. Should any of the electrical components need to be replaced, be sure to use only OEM parts. Now, let's review. Be sure to monitor the area. Be sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. Be sure to eliminate all potential ignition sources and be sure to use only OEM parts. Should you have any questions, concerns when making any repairs, please stop and contact us at True immediately. Again, we at True would like to thank you for your time and participation in this presentation.